My name is Big Time. We're trying to send a message to anybody who lives in New York City. Get the fuck out of there. If you're in any major Democrat city, leave, escape. It is anarcho-tyranny, and you are not safe, and you will not be protected. You will be taxed to death, and criminals are allowed to kill you. Oh, big time. What's the big deal? Well, let's start with the Soros funded district attorney, black supremacist, the anti white black supremacist. Alvin Bragg promises not to prosecute theft to establish racial equity balance, crime of poverty. Bragg promised he would create a fracture between the New York City Police Department and the Manhattan DA's office. Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg said during his campaign that racial equity needed to be a priority and that he didn't believe thievery should be prosecuted since it was a crime of poverty. That's right. When black people rob you, it's because of slavery. During the May 2021 meeting, or when they carjack you or commit a strong arm robbery like Michael Brown, it's not their fault. They just babies. Bragg articulated his intention to focus on racial equity instead of prosecuting theft. I grew up with friends disappearing over charges like theft, and even if there is an alternative to incarceration, such as diversion programs, there is a consequence of disruption for the family. We need to be asking. Does something make us safer? And prosecuting a young person, even if it doesn't end in incarceration, such as in diversion programs, in my view, does not make us safer. I think we need to move away from what I will call a crime of poverty. That's right. Bragg was speaking to a group from Young New Yorkers in 2021. The organization applies a racial justice framework to all levels of operation, as it diverts individuals facing charges under the age of 25 from the criminal justice system. Oh, a racial justice framework. So, in other words, this is probably similar to Baltimore, where 60% of all violent crime in New York City is from the black community. 60% from the latest crime census. And he won't prosecute them because, slavery, Jim Crow, and systematic institutional, because that's what he honestly believes. He's a psychopath. It's anarcho-tyranny. Bragg said his overall intention was to shrink the footprint. Well, then be a defense attorney. You're in the wrong job. Bragg believed crimes that disproportionately incarcerate black people are morally indefensible to enforce. That's right. When blacks commit crime, it's not their fault. These cases do not belong in criminal court. The punishments are disproportionately harsh and fall disproportionately on the backs of people of color. This makes them morally indefensible. That's right. They can murder you, and it's not their fault. They can murder your children. It's not their fault. Bragg stated on his website, "This is why I will not prosecute most petty offenses through the traditional criminal court system. I will either dismiss these charges outright or offer the accused person the opportunity to complete a program without ever setting foot in a courtroom." That's right, guys. Oh, did they carjack you? Community service. In Manhattan, every single step in a case and the way a case is proceeded, from what someone is charged with to the plea they are offered to the sentence they are given, is rife with racial disparities. The New York City Police Department released data showing New York City's 5 boroughs being overrun with a handful of thieves who were arrested over 6,000 times and released back into the streets. Sounds like black privilege to me. White privilege is pretty much a term for black failure. And now we have people in government who won't even prosecute black thieves. We're slowly becoming South Africa. I wonder when we'll get the racial quotas for water and food. During the meeting, Bragg also promised he would create a fracture between the New York City Police Department and the Manhattan DA when he was elected. See, this isn't your job. Your job is to put people in prison. Be a defense attorney. For too long, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, racist, Marxist bullshit. The statements reflect those of the chief prosecutor, Meg Rice, who was brought into Bragg's office. Rice has advocated to include a critical race theory framework in the prosecution years before joining the Manhattan DA. Rice previously bragged about letting violent felons out on the street, including a murderer. Before joining Bragg's office, Rice created the Institute for Innovation on Prosecution, which suggested prosecutors should intentionally undermine the charges police officers bring forward. I hope you meet these criminals in the street. And whatever happens to you, well, I'm going to leave that up to God. They say only God can judge you. I'm not God. I can't forgive you. And I have, don't worry, Big Time brought some receipts of what's happening. So wait for the rest of the video before you judge me. The Institute said prosecutors must focusing on acknowledging our nation's shameful history of slavery and racism, which continues to cloud the criminal justice system. Blacks commit more crime and are more violent anywhere they go. You just need to deal with that. Bragg's chief prosecutor has argued for critical race theory ideology to be integrated. You already said that. A new paradigm of prosecution while claiming violent criminals are not necessarily bad dudes. So one of the first things, of course, it's a white woman. Of course. Reese. I wonder what kind of last name that is. So one of the first things to do is to change the language, the bad dude. What does that mean? What are the circumstances of that person coming into the criminal justice system into the first place? Well, don't worry. Big Time brought the receipts. So let's cover one more story. We'll have a follow-up to that story. And we're going to essentially compare three things that are happening, three stories out of New York. There are hundreds of examples, but I chose these three to give an example of why you need to get the fuck out. So, this was an Asian woman. I think she's Chinese, I'm not sure. So, East Asian. She was stabbed to death in her apartment by a black homeless guy who had been in and out of the prison and one of those people who wasn't a bad dude. So, according to Meg Rice and Alvin Bragg, this Asian woman was stabbed 40 times in her apartment because of slavery. I wish this Asian woman had a gun and blew this motherfucker away. But then she'd be in prison for defending herself. That's called Anarcho-Tyranny. That's a term from the Gulag Archipelago. I can't say the word, and I read it a long time ago. But essentially, during Stalin's reign, criminals were allowed to do whatever they wanted. And that was just expected of them because they're criminals. However, if you as a citizen defended yourself, you went to prison because you're not a criminal. You should know better. And you just have to stand by and let them kill you. It's a form of anarcho-tyranny. So, two cops heard the desperate screams of the Chinatown woman who was stalked by a homeless stranger and murdered in her apartment, and even spoke to her killer through the door, but failed to help. The victim's family claims in a lawsuit. Christina Una Lee, rest in peace, 35, was attacked by a black guy who followed her in as she entered her Christine Street building around 4:20 a.m. on February 13th, 2022. Neighbors heard her cries for help for at least 5 minutes as she was being viciously butchered and dialed 911. Give me 1 sec. I'm trying to pull something up. Two identified officers from the 5th Precinct, about 3 blocks away, responded to the 911 calls in 4 minutes and heard Miss Lee screaming for help, according to the Manhattan Supreme Court filing against the city and the cops. They failed to gain entry to Mrs. Lee's apartment until Miss Lee had been stabbed more than 40 times by her attacker and succumbed to her injuries. Her aunt, Buksun Lee, said, so here she is, she's dead. They even spoke to her alleged killer through the closed door of Miss Lee's apartment, the suit alleges. It's a shame. And she had just moved there the year before. Despite having reason to believe Miss Lee's life was in imminent danger, the officers failed to gain entry to Miss Lee's apartment or otherwise provide her with any potentially life saving police or medical assistance at the time. According to the litigation, which seeks unspecified damages, it took additional officers more than an hour to arrive, and the emergency services unit cops finally forced open the apartment door. Lee's body was found inside, and Samed Nash, 25, whose long rap sheet included robbery and petty larceny, was found hiding under a mattress. Well, this is your fault, Lee. See, if you weren't so white adjacent, and if you didn't study so hard, and if you just gave black people all your money, and just admit that you're an evil person because you profit off of white supremacy and meritocracy, you probably wouldn't be dead. So honestly, this is your fault. That's right. This guy isn't a bad dude. It's not his fault he stabbed this woman 40 times. It's slavery. So what happened is he followed her in, and my assumption is her alarm bells were going off. This is similar to a Brianna Kumpfer, the girl who was stabbed in LA. She was afraid to be racist. She was afraid to be doxxed by all the black Twitter. So she allowed this guy to follow her up 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, where he just walked in behind her and killed her. You're not even allowed to carry a gun to defend yourself. And this woman is dead because of the fucking Democrats and weak-ass, spineless, cowardly Republicans. I'm not even sure if you're allowed. If she had used mace on this guy, she would have been arrested. So he followed her up 4 flights of stairs, went into her apartment, and killed her. I am so fucking sick and tired of the poor blacks. And everybody and the family. Well, we'll see. I'll bring that up. I'm not. Miss Lee's death was caused by the wrongful acts of the defendants. Her family alleges in the litigation, which was first reported by the Daily Beast, the NYPD declined to comment on the litigation. Well, I also want to say that the NYPD is now down like 900 police officers. So an hour response time is normal. And you're not allowed to defend yourself in New York City. You have a duty to retreat. And if anybody's following the Jordan Neely case, you know, the Michael Jackson impersonator, I love how they get a video from 11 years ago and act like that's what he was doing. Oh, this poor Michael Jackson impersonator and this mean white Marine just killed him. When I talk to liberals, you can't even talk about crime that happens to whites. You have to talk about a completely different group of people who are the victims, and they suddenly listen. And that's just years of brainwashing, especially boomers. So this woman was murdered. She didn't profile. She was terrified of being racist to this guy, and it ended up getting her dead. This guy's been let out on the street multiple times, arrested multiple times, and now the Asian family is suing. So give me a sec. Let's hit the videos. Let's relive what happened. I have 2 sources here. So again, the police show up. Now, I don't know everything that happened. Maybe they didn't hear anything. Maybe they didn't know. But it took them an hour to show up. Are you one of those people who supported defund the police? Well, this is what you get. An hour response time and a criminal justice system that doesn't punish them because they're black. And it still confuses me how Asians won't come over to the white side, because your children are just as vulnerable because you're considered white adjacent. And this is a result of defund the police and, oh, give up your guns and, oh, give up your right to stand your ground and castle doctrine. This is what you get.
Morning, police investigating a brutal murder in Chinatown. A young woman returning home from a night out, followed by a man who forced his way into her apartment and stabbed her to death. News 4's Jessica Cunnington spoke with neighbors who said the attacker should never have been out on the streets.
A bouquet of yellow roses lay outside this Chinatown apartment building for Christina Yuna Lee. A regular Saturday night out ended with her being dropped off here at her building, then followed and found dead.
She opened the door and he just slipped in right behind her. She never even knew he was there. She walked up 6 flights of stairs and this man mercilessly stalked her.
Brian Chin, the landlord of the building, says the man then rushed into her apartment as soon as she opened her door. Her screams pierced through the building just after 4 a.m. Sunday. 2 young women living across the hall called 911. Officers got there in minutes. The emergency service unit had to knock down the steel door, and they found Lee in her bathroom, stabbed to death.
You know, I'm angry. I'm devastated for...
Now, see what the news did there? Now, the New York Post says, let me scroll back. So they responded in minutes, but it says the alleged killer spoke through the door. They didn't go in, and then it took them an hour to respond. That's the part they're not saying. See how they're kind of trying to cover for the police like it's not their fault? And look, I don't know how I feel. I get pissed off when the police say, oh, you don't need a gun to defend yourself, call us. Well, if this keeps happening, what the fuck are we paying you for? You should let us be allowed to defend ourselves.
This woman and for her family, devastated, heartbroken for everybody in the building.
According to 3 sources, Asamad Nash was the man who stalked and stabbed her. Covered in blood, officers took him into custody right there at the scene and later to the hospital to be treated. Nash has 5 prior felonies and 3 pending court cases right now.
Yeah, of course he does. And Alvin Bragg and all these people who think blacks are these poor little innocent puppies, or as actual Justice Warrior says, they're Aladdins. I bet, what do you think? Do you think he stabbed her 40 times and he sung a fucking Broadway song like in a Disney musical? What do you think?
Someone who neighbors say should not have been out on the streets.
This is about the community, and our elected officials need to do something much different because this was unavoidable.
Mayor Eric Adams tweeting out that this is the definition.
Oh, fuck you. You don't do anything. Eric Adams won't do a goddamn thing. All right, so that was the Peacock. Now let's go to Fox.
Police have the suspect in custody, and we are now learning more about the woman who was killed. Morgan Mackay is live at the scene with the latest on this case. Morgan.
A terrifying and heartbreaking story, Arthur, that is still under investigation. But the NYPD is now confirming that Christina Yuna Lee, a 35-year-old woman, was followed into her apartment here behind me and brutally murdered this morning.
I mean, from what I saw, she had just opened her door and just stepped inside, and he just rushed inside. There's nothing that she could have done differently.
Well, I mean, I disagree with that a lot. She could have profiled him. I mean, the reason he chose her is because she's an Asian woman. She's a woman. He knew he could easily overpower her, and it was a crime of opportunity. He gets let out, he commits violent offenses, and because he's black, the criminal justice system, like Alvin Bragg, goes, oh, it's not his fault. And now this woman is dead because blacks cannot hold each other accountable, especially progressive liberal Democrat blacks.
And it's just
he's just a mammy. That's all he is. Alvin Bragg is just a mammy.
horrific for the community.
It happened at around 4 in the morning on Sunday. A man who sources have identified as Asamad Nash followed Christina Yuna Lee into her Lower East Side apartment, up to where she was living on the 6th floor. NYPD then received a 911 call from a neighbor who heard Lee screaming for help. When police arrived, the suspect had barricaded himself inside the apartment and refused to let anyone inside. When the NYPD eventually gained access, they found that Lee had been brutally stabbed repeatedly. The suspect was taken into custody and is
40 times. I hate that they don't. I give the news credit for showing a black guy on the news. That usually doesn't happen. And that's starting to happen less and less on Fox, as Fox changes more to represent the left-leaning media. But they can't just say she was stabbed 40 times. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. 60% of all violent crime in New York City is committed by the black community. Not all, but blacks represent 60% of all the violent crime in New York City.
Currently being evaluated at Bellevue Hospital. The owner of the apartment.
Oh, thank God the murderer is getting a psychiatric evaluation. That's very important. We treat the murderer better than this innocent woman.
Building, Brian Chin says at least
I'm glad that he gets to talk about his feelings to psychiatrists and gets 3 meals a day. That's very important.
he just moved to New York City within the past year. He said her death has rocked the entire community.
We can't protect against monsters like this. No matter how much we invest, it comes down to our elected officials.
Although police are still investigating the motive for this attack, Mayor
Yeah, you see this? As a citizen in New York City, you're not allowed to have any of this. That's a felony.
Eric Adams and U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand
Why are police allowed to defend themselves and you're not?
both released statements condemning the violence that has touched the Asian American community once again. Mayor Adams, since taking office, has outlined numerous ways he plans for the city to tackle the rise in crime. But some are saying there are issues that need to be tackled immediately.
Walking from her cab to her apartment, that was it? How does this happen in New York City, the greatest city on earth? How does that happen?
Chen also blaming recent policies from the new Manhattan district attorney.
Yeah, my family, we have owned this building since the 1970s. My grandparents were Chinese immigrants that came from China that built themselves. So we built up this.
Yes, but the Democrats don't like your community because you are hardworking. You value family, education, and meritocracy. That's why the Democrats hate you. That's why you're now called white adjacent. That's the same reason why Harvard and the University of North Carolina openly discriminate against Asian Americans, because they want more blacks. It's the same reason why a black can get 1,000 on the SATs, a white has to get a 1270, and an Asian American has to get a 1450 just to get into the same state school. So now that you're caught up with what happened to her, that was last year, her parents are suing the police department, which I'm not really sure if that's the right thing to do. I'm happy they're doing something, but they should be suing Alvin Bragg because, again, it doesn't really, the police are not able to, like they said, the guy's been arrested and let go and arrested and let go. So I think they're suing the wrong people. But if the police showed up and they didn't go as far as they could, it's hard to be a police officer today. I don't know how much I can say. The only thing I can say is the police should be speaking out against citizens being allowed to defend themselves. The citizens should be allowed to have mace, tasers, billy clubs, blackjacks, and guns. But the police don't speak out and say you should be allowed to defend yourself. So there's nothing I can say. You can't be there. You're missing 900 police officers. Criminals are being let out, but none of you speak up for GOA or NRA. You just protect yourselves. And there's going to be riots next year, and the police will circle their wagons, and they'll drive around in tanks, and you'll be left on your own. It'll happen again.
Team exclusive interview.
So let's see what the parents say.
The family of Christina Lee speaking publicly for the first time. Lee's murder made national news. A young Asian American woman stalked and stabbed several times in her apartment in Chinatown last year.
By a black guy. Get it right.
Her family is sharing their grief.
A black repeat offender who kept being arrested and let go by Soros-funded District Attorney Alvin Bragg because slavery. Remember, that's why she's dead. Because of white supremacy, systematic, institutional, blah, 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 blah.
Revealing why they're suing the New York City Police Department. They spoke to News 4's investigative reporter, Sarah Wallace.
Who's going to bring her back? Nobody. Nobody going to bring her back.
It's not just Boshun Lee's anguish over losing her niece. It's how Christina Lee died so poor.
Wow. An attractive woman. I feel for this family. I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I can say. All I can say, so I don't Fed post, is a millstone.
Brutally in her Chinatown apartment in February of last.
Matthew 18:6.
Year that is haunting. The 35-year-old murdered, police say, by this homeless man, Asamad Nash, who allegedly stalked and then repeatedly stabbed Christina with a kitchen knife. The family claims they got little information from the NYPD, more from the media.
You still don't have the details of what happened.
Yeah, that's right.
The attack on Christina became a rallying cause to highlight a rash of anti-Asian attacks happening then across the country.
We want to live in a safe community.
The viciousness of her murder.
Yeah, but the Asians should join my side, right? Because the same thing that's happening to me is happening to your community as well. But it's just weird.
In stark contrast to this tranquil setting in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, where Christina's memorial urn is now surrounded by the
Can you imagine that your fucking daughter or niece moves to a city and a year later she's in a fucking urn? Her ashes are in a fucking urn. I don't know what I would do. I really don't.
bouquets of flowers her family brings every week, along with their prayers. But they say prayers won't bring them answers about the NYPD response that night. That's why they filed this lawsuit alleging negligence.
We have not had access.
This is another lawsuit I'm going to follow.
To the police report itself, but we are calling to account the police department in terms of its failure to protect Christina Yuna Lee.
She's screaming, help. Why these police did not act quickly while she's screaming help?
The lawsuit claims unnamed officers responded but didn't enter Christina's apartment until an hour after 911 calls from neighbors who reported hearing screaming.
Whereas the police had ample opportunity to intervene, they did not.
The complaint says the responding NYPD members denied and or unreasonably delayed providing Ms. Lee with police assistance and emergency medical treatment, causing her pain and suffering and contributing to her death. Cops say Nash was found hiding in the victim's apartment. The alleged murder weapon also recovered.
I was shocked. My mind is how much you suffer with the pain.
Hey, kill nobody.
Nash has pleaded not guilty to murder and other charges. The family's greatest wish for Christina, who cared deeply about those less fortunate, that a homeless shelter be named in her honor. Her family hoping to carry on the legacy of her selfless heart.
We go out, help them, we'll serve them, we'll do something for them. We really don't want any other money.
The city's law department and the NYPD told us they don't comment on pending litigation. The next court date in the criminal case is June 12th. The Manhattan.
So we're going to follow that. So that's going to be next week. And real quick, I want to point out something. Everyone's aware of the case of Jordan Neely and the two, the Marine, and it looked like a black guy and a Latino guy who are not being indicted by Alvin Bragg. But for anybody to say, oh, the neighbors heard and the neighbors called the police and why didn't the neighbors do anything? Well, you've seen what happened if you try to protect yourself in New York City. But I want to bring something to the attention that New York City is actually the murder of Kitty Genovese. She was essentially raped and stabbed outside of her apartment complex in Kew Gardens in Queens. Now, it says that the New York Times published an article claiming that 38 witnesses saw or heard the attack and that nobody did anything. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this at the time. What I'm saying is this created a psychological study by Darlene Latane at Columbia State University. And this has been come to known as the bystander effect or the Genovese effect, which is, according to them, they say that the more people who stand around and witness a crime, the more they deflect responsibility, thinking that somebody else will step forward. That's kind of the reasoning they come up with. And a lot of these liberal, soft science people seem to only see the good in people. My theory is in the 60s and the 70s and early 80s, crime was getting so out of crime wasn't starting to get out of control in 64. It did get super bad. We're talking about in like the early 80s, New York had 2,400 murders, homicides a year, and Giuliani got it down to like 400, 300. My belief is that people did hear her screaming and they did nothing, because that's what happens when you live in a multicultural society. Groups only care about their own group, you know. And again, there's more I could look into this. I just want to bring this up. This is the bystander effect. This could be another, maybe sort of a psychological aspect to it. But again, in New York, if you fight against a criminal, you will be prosecuted. So let me show something else that happened. This is another story. Check out this channel. This is Rising Crime News. This just happened, and this guy, of course, got arrested
as he was walking to a parking garage. Phoner says he shot Gonzalez after he lunged at him with a sharp object that police later determined was a pen. Phoner said he emptied the revolver, killing the suspected robber. Phoner, after a search warrant was issued, was charged with 26 counts of criminal possession of a weapon after police found 24 firearms, body armor vests, and 153 loaded high-capacity magazines in his home. But he has not yet been charged in the fatal shooting of Gonzalez. Cody Gonzalez attempted to rob 65-year-old Charles Phoner around 2 a.m. as he was walking to a parking garage. Phoner says he shot Gonzalez after...
All right, so you get the idea. So here's an old guy, 60 years old, living in New York City. Imagine you're walking home and you're being followed by this guy who claims he's going to stab you and rob you, and you see him putting his hands in his pocket. Again, if you live somewhere, withstand your ground. Be reasonable to assume this person was going to attack you, especially if they say they're going to stab you and kill you.
5-year-old Charles Phoner around 2 a.m. as he was walking to a parking garage. Phoner says he shot Gonzalez after he lunged at him with a sharp object that police later determined was a pen.
So maybe this guy was bluffing. Maybe he was, maybe he saw an old guy and he's like, oh, just like the Asian girl. You see an older man, especially an older white guy, and you think, oh, nothing will happen to me. He's old, easy victim. One thing I'm going to say, though, about older people, while yes, you are correct, a lot of times they are a good victim because they won't fight back. You are going to encounter, as things get worse, just like this guy in New York and just like that white woman in Florida, older people, there is a higher probability, as they see more of their friends and family become victims, that they will respond more aggressively. They know they're old. They know they have only one chance to survive, and they will take that chance if they have to. This guy took the chance, and now I think he's being charged with 91 years, and the judge is trying to make an example out of him. I can't really say I blame him. If I was being followed home by somebody who said they were going to rob me or stab me, I don't really know what to say. In the state I live in, I live in Pennsylvania with the Castle Doctrine. But what I will say is, if this guy had all that hardware, dude, just get the fuck out of New York. All that hardware had to cost money. But let's go. We have the follow-up case for that. So here's a guy who reasonably believed he was going to be attacked. And now he's facing 91 years in prison because he attacked. Oh, the poor criminal. My mistake. So we'll cover his arrest, and then we'll cover
against the man who police say shot and killed an attempted robber.
The 65-year-old facing multiple counts of criminal possession of...
And remember, robbery is the force or threat of force. Theft or larceny is when you steal something and it doesn't involve the other person. Robbery is theft or larceny, but with force or the threat of force. So yeah, you could say you could say, oh, you shot somebody over a pen. Well, I don't know what you have. I'm not psychic. I don't know what you have in your pocket. And if you're following somebody home in a dangerous, violent city where people are being shoved on the subway and people are being beaten up and shot and killed, and they're not being prosecuted, and then someone's following you home and saying that they're going to rob you or stab you, and you see them rush towards you and pull something out of their pocket, I would argue it's reasonable to believe you're about to either be killed or receive serious bodily injury. And I don't feel bad for the robber. That, fuck around and find out.
Of a weapon, but he has not been charged with murder.
Fox 5's Antoine Lewis explains.
Charles, any comment? Any comment at all, Charles? Were you afraid? 65-year-old Charles Fainer leaves the 102nd Precinct charged with multiple counts of criminal possession of a weapon. Early Wednesday morning around 2, authorities say Fainer was by...
This is similar to the Bernie Getz case, where Bernie Getz was charged with criminal possession before he was also charged with attempted murder.
By the driveway of his apartment near 82nd Avenue and Queens Boulevard when 32-year-old Cody Gonzalez approached him holding a sharp object and demanded money and cigarettes. Police say the confrontation escalated and Fainer pulled out a gun and opened fire. Gonzalez was pronounced dead at the scene with a pen in his right hand.
Well, that's Gonzalez's fault. That's your fault. I don't feel bad for a motherfucker who threatens to rob you. Fuck you. Get a job. I mean, they're literally handing money over to immigrants hand in fist, and you can't get a fucking job? Fuck you.
Fainer called 911 and waited for authorities.
Charlie didn't want to be involved with this. He didn't want any problems.
On Thursday, Fox 5's Reagan Medji spoke off camera with the apartment building superintendent named John. The building surveillance...
Yeah, but he's white, and we got to throw him into prison, right? Because systematic, institutional, right, Alvin Bragg?
His camera caught the confrontation. John describes what he and Reagan saw on that video.
He gave him ample opportunity to turn around and walk away, and he just didn't want to. He wasn't budging. The gun did not faze him.
Before the shooting took place, residents say Gonzalez vandalized at least 2 apartments.
So the gun did not faze him. So that sounds like the dude had the gun out. And usually what you're trained to keep it at the ground. I don't like that. That to me is like a bluff. Look, if you pull it, you use it. Okay? A bluff is don't put your life on a bluff. And if you can't use it, don't carry it. Okay? So even when he pulled out a gun and pointed it at the ground, this guy wasn't impressed. He wasn't scared. And this old guy did what he had to do. If I was on the jury, not guilty.
Apartment buildings, destroying the call entry system of one. This tenant saw the commotion on security cameras and called 911.
He's absolutely deranged. He's going crazy. He's kicking in our buzzers. That's why a lot of the buzzers were going off. And he's kicking in the glass doors.
According to reports, Fainer has a weapons permit, but it allegedly does not cover the gun used in the shooting. Those who knew him tell Fox 5 he's not one to seek out trouble. His building superintendent says the video also shows that he tried to de-escalate.
To me, he could have ended it a lot sooner than that. And he showed amazing restraint there because anyone else probably would have done it sooner.
Yeah, that's interesting. If you had a license to carry, where's the gun that you're licensed to carry? That's interesting. But again, we can't have citizens, especially white citizens, defending themselves. So let's follow up with why you need to get the fuck out of New York City. You have a woman who was stabbed to death by a black guy with a long criminal history, including robbery. Police didn't save her. You have another guy who, again, you don't deserve to die over breaking property. I'm not saying that. But when you threaten someone and you threaten to stab them and you follow them and you say you're going to rob them and you demand their money and you're committing armed robbery, it's reasonable to believe your life's in danger. But of course, we can't have citizens defending themselves. Now, for the part I want to get to. So all this crime is happening. Alvin Bragg is letting all the criminals go, but move over, you dirty Americans. Your replacement is here.
White House, thousands of migrants, 50 churches and houses of worship will open their doors and set up beds.
Church leaders say it's a place to rest and a place to find the strength to start a new life in the U.S. Fox 5's Morgan Mackay joins us now in studio. And Morgan, you actually visited one of these locations, and soon it'll be full of beds.
You're exactly right, Stephen and Tasha. It's a first of its kind program. Nearly 1,000 migrants will be housed in these places of worship. These new type of faith-based shelters will be open from
I'm playing this clip because there's one thing I want you to hear.
7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And then the migrants will be moved to daytime centers, which will also be operated by these houses of worship, but paid for by the city.
We have the mission, we have the motivation, and we have the facilities to help.
Starting in July, around 50 houses of worship in New York City will be opening up their facilities for migrants to stay overnight. Each location will shelter 19 single adult men. The city says by August, they expect nearly 1,000 migrants to be housed in these places of worship. Archbishop Eugene Blunt of the Elam International Fellowship in Brooklyn, speaking with Fox 5 News exclusively, says they are looking forward to being a part of this program.
The ministry building was originally a convent, so we have space where we can house people. We have space where people can gather in public space.
It's the first for the city. It's the first for us.
The city will be spending around $125 per migrant for each night they stay at.
That's right, people. The churches won't take in the homeless, and they won't take in Americans because they don't get paid for it. Let that sink in.
One of these houses of worship. Right now, it costs the city around $380 per night.
How does it feel to have your own faith-based leaders treat you like a second-class citizen, you filthy Americans?
For each migrant household to stay at a converted hotel. This cost is projected to balloon to $2.9 billion by next year. Pastor Guilford Monrose, who leads a faith-based agency within the Adams administration, says this program with houses of worship will be more cost-effective.
I don't want to use the word cheaper, but it's much cost effective, and it gives the city a more a better opportunity to help migrants have a sense of hope.
On top of the nearly 1,000 overnight beds, the city will also be opening 5 daytime centers for migrants to go to during the day that will offer legal services and more, while these faith-based spaces will continue their normal activities. Over 72,000 asylum seekers have arrived in New York City since last year.
This influx of asylum seekers is a serious crisis, one that New York City is facing largely on our own. It's unfair and it's not right that New York is going through this.
The city will also be helping these places of worship with additional costs, such as laundry services and security officers.
There. Security officers. You hear that? So Christina Lee was murdered by a black repeat offender. Alvin Bragg doesn't prosecute blacks because systemic institutional bullshit, slavery. Charles Fafner is a white guy who defended himself from a Latino guy. Defends himself, no police are around. So 2 times we have 2 crimes, 2 violent felonies, attempted robbery and a home invasion turned into a murder. And the police aren't there to save you. You're not allowed to defend yourself. But don't worry, everybody. The migrants are going to take your tax dollars and they're going to be safe. Don't worry, guys. Fuck you. Get out of the way. They're going to protect them.
We asked the mayor if security has been a concern.
It would be irresponsible not to have thousands of people at a location and not have security personnel.
That's right. Fuck you, New Yorkers. Fuck you. No guns for you. No mace for you. You're not even allowed to wear a vest on the subway, but we're going to use your money to hire security for the people who just got here yesterday. What's it like to bend over and take it from the fucking state, huh?
I would not allow that to happen.
The New York Disaster Interfaith
You're a fucking communist.
Services Organization will be coordinating this program. The city says each contract.
I will not allow that to happen. Let's hear that again. Wow. He just told all the New Yorkers, all the Americans in New York to go fuck themselves. Let's play that one more time.
Security has been a concern.
It would be irresponsible not to have thousands of people at a location and not have security personnel. I would not allow that to happen.
The New York
But he won't speak out for your gun rights. But he won't speak out for your ability to train and have a militia or defend yourself. But he won't allow you to hire private security. You can't have a gun. You can't have a knife. You can't have mace or a stun gun. And if you use it, he's not going to go against Alvin Bragg. He's not going to stand against Governor Hochul. And how Governor Hochul in the New York City and New York State just took the New York City Rifle Company versus Bruin and just fucking created a bunch of laws out of thin air to deny you your Second Amendment rights again. But he says it's irresponsible not to protect your replacements.
York Disaster Interfaith Services Organization will be coordinating this program. The city says each contract is different, so there is no clear timeline for how long these houses of worship will be used to house migrants.
So what that means is we don't want to put a cap on how much of your tax dollars we can take. So we plan on taking them indefinitely. Let me translate for you. Get out of New York. You're not safe. You're not allowed to defend yourself. The police can't save you. They're down 900 officers. And all your money's being used to save another group of people. Okay? I mean, do what you got to do, but understand that that could cost you your life or you could go to prison. So the only thing I can say is do what you got to do to survive. Try to find a red state where you're allowed to carry and defend yourself. You're not going to change New York. Anyway, I'm big time. That's news to me.